they're being lied to by the doctors that they trust, in the same way with the COVID vaccine. So there's an entire ecosystem of evil. So I don't mean to paint these parents as monsters, because they're largely ignorant and they're being told by doctors that they're doing the right thing.
Happy Wednesday, everybody. Is it me, or are a lot of men acting and looking like sissies these days? I'm being serious. I don't know if it's just because I'm pregnant with a boy, and I do tend to be a little more aggressive, but I feel like I could beat up a lot of men today.
Meet Candace Owens, hard op weg om de meest spraakmakende Amerikaanse politiek commentator te worden. Dagelijks bedient ze haar abonnees met de Candace Owens podcast op de voor haar belangrijkste thema's zoals LGBT, COVID en haar strijd tegen feminisme. Op uitnodiging van de FvD bracht ze zaterdag 23 maart een bezoek aan Nederland om hun leden toe te spreken tijdens het congres in de Rij. Voorafgaand daaraan sprak ik haar over haar meest controversiële opvattingen.
Please be seated. What an honor to be here. I actually had no idea that I was the honored guest of the day. So that's wonderful.
Miss Owens, welcome to the Netherlands. First time?
Yes, it is my first time.
Like it so far?
Beautiful.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Today, FvD-congres. What's your goal? What brings you here?
You know, my goal is always sort of to tap into what people are thinking overseas. It seems like there is a lot of synchronicity in terms of the events and the ideas, and I think there's been definitely some sort of a spiritual movement happening globally where people are recognizing that we're dangerously close to losing our countries. So aside from sharing how we're feeling, I also like to see how other people are thinking.
Do you often speak at these type of conferences?
You know, I spend more of my time obviously dedicated to speaking all across America, because that's where I'm trying to impact the most change. But like I said, I've definitely done events in the UK, and I definitely recognize that within Europe, people are definitely having some conversations that needed to be happen.
There's a lot going on in the world: Gaza, Russia, Trump, the COVID aftermath. What will be your most important message?
How all of those topics relate to the destruction of the family unit, and hopefully I can string people through them to help them understand that all of the initiatives are really united in trying to encourage the breakdown of family. So it's just Marxist philosophy by different names. One thing we should never forget is COVID. Wow. I'll tell you what that was. What a strange time. You literally had people that were upset to see people breathing, right? Talk about the success of psychology. This was pretty much a global experiment. Let's see how far we can take it. We are the psychopaths. Let's see how far we can take it. Can we get them to yell at one another if they're breathing? And by golly, people did it.
Talk about the aftermath of COVID. If everything you claim about vaccination compulsion and vaccination harm is true, how can those responsible be held accountable?
Well, I haven't changed my position on COVID. I mean, from the very beginning, I told people that it was a psychological experiment, and mostly people failed it worldwide. And I think that what you had were psychopaths that wanted to see how far they could take a narrative by traumatizing people, by, repeating phrases. Social distancing, 6 feet social distancing, to see if it could create a mass psychosis. And it did. People were actually scared of other people breathing. And it's really important to reflect on COVID. It's a very strange thing that people were terrified of breathing, right? And so it really was just psychopaths in power seeing how much power they had. And unfortunately, people put up their bodies to be experimented on. I hope that people recognize, and I think that what ended up happening was they won that battle. But in terms of ideas, it actually led to a lot of people, like with conservative principles, winning the war, because now people recognize how they were lied to. They recognize how they put their bodies up and allow them to be experimented on, and that the people who were trying to tell them not to do it, like me, were labeled conspiracy theorists. And now all of the conspiracy theories have been proven as true. Unfortunately, I don't think that those people are going to be held responsible. And that is because, first and foremost, they are in tremendous positions of power. Secondly, they're quite brilliant at ensuring that even though they convince you to do these things via psychological experiment, they're going to say, well, you did it yourself. It was up to you, and we did this to save the world. And so, unfortunately, this just needs to be a chapter that we study historically. We make people recognize just how sinister the government agencies can be, and just how that effort was globalized, right? We talk often about globalism, the dangers of globalism, and what you saw was a globalist experiment on the population. Yeah. At the end of the day, fear was used in different capacities, maybe not fearful that they were going to die, but fearful of something else, which is why it was one of the greatest evils that's ever been enacted on the planet, and they're going to get away with it.
You have encountered a lot of resistance during the pandemic by speaking out against the vaccination campaign. What is the response to this nowadays when you talk about it on that subject?
So I was actually very early on the vaccine stuff. You know, I am a proud anti-vaxxer for all of them. I don't vax my children at all, and I have recognized that vaccine industry was actually built on lies. And so a lot of people are just now waking up because of the COVID vaccine, and I put together an entire series to show them that this was actually every vaccine. It was mass hysteria, lies, manipulation, and then convincing people to put poison into their arms. And today there are so many children that are sick, and people don't understand why children have, so many diseases. The autism rates keep going up. So I've been dedicated to educating people about vaccines for a very long time, and people are so receptive now to that. I think prior to COVID, they thought it was all crazy and kooky, and now they're realizing that Big Pharma is one of the greatest evils on the planet. It is a medical cartel. It is a drug cartel with the explicit purpose of turning people into addicts and governmental addicts. Like, the health agencies aren't there to make you healthy. They're there to make you sick and to make sure that you keep coming back for a pill. And the sooner that people awaken to that fact, the healthier people will be.
Currently, the vaccination rate against measles is a much discussed item in the Dutch media. Do you see a connection between the forced way in which citizens have been vaccinated against COVID and the declining vaccination rates against other diseases?
Yeah, and I hope that that's partially due to the fact that a lot of people are pursuing alternative channels and learning the real history. I mean, the fear that people have of measles, rubella, mumps, it's all such a nonsense when you actually look at the history. Nobody was dying of these diseases, and I try to give them this example. If you talk to your parents, they'll tell you they all got measles in the same way that we all got chickenpox, right? We had no fear of chickenpox when we were kids. We all got thrown into a room. Everyone got chickenpox. Now there's a vaccine, and people believe that chickenpox was so scary, something that everybody just got. And so it's a lot of fear, it's a lot of manipulation, and people don't actually know the data and they think that once upon a time everyone was dying of these diseases, and that just isn't the truth. Yeah. And what's happened actually is that these vaccines have caused various other illnesses that are much more severe. The majority of them tell you that it can cause seizures, and you're signing away your life. I mean, would you rather your child had a case of measles or a life-altering seizure that rendered them unable to take care of themselves for the rest of their lives? It's a no-brainer, and the only thing that you can do is to render them powerless in the future. You have to immediately start looking to the future. And so when you start saying that people aren't vaccinating their kids as much, that makes me happy, because that lets you know that people are taking these things into their own hands now, that they're not going to allow it to happen again. So the next time they try a globalist psychological experiment, the people will be ready for it. That's all that you can do is really learn from history. They've made their money with all vaccines. As soon as they distribute them, a portion of the sales, they're already waiting for lawsuits. They minted 9 new billionaires because of the COVID vaccine and the forced vaccination of the population. The lawsuits are a drop in the bucket for them financially. They don't really care about them. But what they do care about is maintaining that sense of fear. They want to make sure people are going to be fearful in the future so that they can keep making money. You want to collapse the medical establishment? Stop giving them your children to experiment on. Learn the true history of the vaccines. Learn the true histories of the pills that they're giving people. They knew that they would create these crises that we're facing, like the opioid crisis. Once you recognize that Big Pharma is an evil, that's the greatest way to render them weak.
There's a lot going on in the world right now. Situation in Gaza. What's your position on that topic?
My position on that topic is such a common sense, humane position, and to see it be radicalized should really wake people up. Ultimately, the goal should be the preservation of life, and for people that think that it's only sad, when Palestinians die, or it's only sad when Israelis die, that's a problem. Yeah. It's a fundamental problem that has been so politicized. The death toll in Gaza is alarming. Every person should be alarmed by it. There are a lot of videos circling on the internet. I think a lot of times in the West, we enjoy so many privileges that you could never imagine your life if a Dutch terrorist did something and then suddenly you were being bombed into oblivion and your children were being bombed into oblivion. And you go, well, it's okay because a Dutch terrorist did this over here. The ability for the media to remove us from our humanity is something that I think about all the time. It was very sad when innocent Israelis were killed, and it is also very sad to see so many Palestinian, particularly children, that have been killed in this conflict since.
If the COVID crisis was a crisis to make people scared of their government and make them listen to their government, what if we look at Gaza, if we look at Ukraine, Russia, what's the ultimate goal behind those wars?
You know, I think that ultimately it's about imperializing. That's what the goal of all wars is, right? And you can imperialize in different ways. You know, I think Afghanistan, it was about resources. It was sold to us as something else. But at the end of the day, I know that there were Marines that were stationed there that were just guarding the poppy fields, opioids, you know. And so people need to be aware of the battle for the earth in just the very simple principle of fighting for resources and then trying to apply that to everything that's happening in the world. You know, it seems to me it's very obvious that the West wants to go to war with Russia. The amount of propaganda, anti-Russia propaganda that we have endured in America, and I'm sure here as well for the last, I would say 7 years, it's been insane. They are constantly trying to make us think that Russia is a conflict when it so obviously is not a major concern for Americans. And so you have to ask the question, why is that? Well, I will say that Russia circumventing the U.S. dollar is going to be a problem. Banking has always been at root of wars as well. And so people need to think in terms of that and not believe what the media is telling you. Like, it's not about, oh, we want to defend Ukraine's borders. It's never going to be something that simple. Yeah. Those are just emotional arguments that are meant to distract you from something that's either going to be about, you know, resources or gold, you know. I was definitely not comfortable hearing the other day in the media that there were people talking about how they're already investing in settlements and beachfront properties. Did you see this in Gaza? That means that's quite strange, right? If this really was a shock and you had no idea this war was going to happen, why is there already well-funded investments for settlements to take place there? And so people are starting to ask those questions. And of course, these people are being labeled anti-Semitic, which is an absolute nonsense, given the fact that there are so many Jewish people who are asking those questions in Jewish organizations that are uncomfortable with what's happening in that region. My opinion is it wouldn't be my business if it wasn't my tax-paying dollars that was going over there. And that is why it is very much our business. America spends way too much money overseas. None of our money should be going to any of these overseas projects, and yet they are.
Een van de meest controversiële opvattingen betreffen die over de LGBT-community. Iets wat bij haar aanwezigheid van bijeenkomsten in Amerika vaak veel weerstand oplevert.
As a non-binary person, what do you have to tell me about my identity? Because I know for a fact I'm not confused.
Okay, next question. Great statement. That's a statement. That's a statement. Okay, you know your identity. You're not confused. Congratulations, sweetheart.
How important is freedom of choice for you?
In what regard?
In any way.
Well, if we're keeping the conversation on COVID, as soon as you no longer have autonomy over your own body, you're a slave, right? The idea that the government can force poison into your arm should terrify everybody. Yeah. And to pretend that you had a choice was an illusion. Yeah. A lot of times we exist under the illusion of choice, and I think that's a question a lot of people are asking, even in terms of our elections. You know, it's specifically in America, when Trump was talking about a swamp, what he meant was that the Democrats and the Republicans were in bed with one another, all of them benefiting from lobbyist groups, all of them selling out the American people, and so that was the illusion of choice. And I think there are tons of illusions of choice, and when in reality, as individuals, we are very much getting squeezed.
Yeah. Okay. But you're very outspoken on the topic LGBT.
Yes.
Can you make very clear, because it's a really sensitive topic for a lot of people, what's your position on where does the freedom end and where does it begin within the LGBT community and the community that speaks out to society in general?
It is the greatest evil in terms of what is happening in America right now, because it focuses on children and it tells children a web of lies, children whose brains are not developed, to put inside of their body drugs in which they will never get their lives back. It sterilizes them, right? It's quite literally the same drugs, these puberty blockers, that are used on pedophiles in prison. And pedophilia, by the way, if you examine the history of transsexuals, the history of transgenderism, it was pedophiles which started pushing for that. It was pedophiles that began experimenting on children, pedophiles in which were molesting the children, and I'm going to name them so that people can't find this controversial. Dr. John Money, Magnus Hirschfeld, who was experimenting on Africans, who had opened a sexology institute. These were people who were throwing perverse parties, and their explicit goal by trying to turn it into psychology was to convince people that it wasn't perversion, that pedophilia wasn't perversion. Magnus Hirschfeld was a part of, individuals who were writing things saying, oh, people can just be born this way, or it's normal to be attracted to children. And these are, again, the same people that molested children. Sigmund Freud, who was celebrated as a hero. His best friend was Wilhelm Fliess. Wilhelm Fliess molested his child. Sigmund Freud wrote about psychoanalysis and created entire theories about children being sexualized at birth to cover for his pedophile friends. This is the history you're not going to learn in school, because the people like Sigmund Freud never were removed from power, right? They actually were turned into heroes and icons and were told that psychoanalysis was this actual breakthrough. It wasn't a breakthrough. It was a movement of pedophiles supported by pedophiles who tried to convince the world that what they were doing was actually fine and normal, and it's not. And until we acknowledge the real history of psychology and psychiatry, which is now being enacted in large in the classrooms, we are not going to be able to stop this satanic agenda on children.
So the problem is the classrooms.
Yes, and so the people that are supporting this agenda, if they're young, it's because they think that it's about love and they think it's about wanting to be who you are. These people are, it's like Stalin youth, They've been a part of a program for a very long time and they don't know any better and they're not learning real history. They're not learning what I just said. Yeah.
But should parents be free? We're talking about freedom, how important is freedom for you? Should parents be free to decide for the children themselves in which class they get their kids in and what their teachers are teaching them?
Parents should understand what the children are teaching them, and of course parents should have a right to decide what schools they want to put their children in. If that's pro-choice in terms of school. No parent should ever have the right to harm their kids physically. No parent should ever have the right to encourage their children to take drugs that quite literally sterilize them for the rest of their lives. Yeah. And unfortunately, even for the parents, and I've learned this just via the interviews that I give, they're being lied to by the doctors that they trust, in the same way with the COVID vaccine. So there's an entire ecosystem of evil. And so I don't mean to paint these parents as monsters, because they're largely ignorant and they're being told by doctors that they're doing the right thing.
So what are the lies?
They're being told that these drugs are reversible, which is the first lie. There's no evidence that these drugs are reversible. How could you reverse sterilizing your children? They're being told that their children are going to be happier on the other side of this. The truth is that children that transition, the suicide rates go up after transitioning, and they're trusting their doctors to believe that this is a solution and not realizing that what's probably underlying their confusion is that they're existing in classrooms that are psychological experiments. Kids were never this confused before because they had adults that were guiding them and telling them right from wrong and telling them truth from fiction. Now fiction has become truth, and the perverts are in the classroom and they're the ones that are teaching them.
Okay. So you're talking about the T within LGBT, transgender people, but you're also talking about body autonomy. So what's an acceptable situation for you? Where does your resistance to transgender people end?
I think once your brain is fully developed, if you decide that you want to take drugs to sterilize yourself, and if you want, I think the adult brain develops at 26 years old. If you're 26 years old and you want to remove your private parts, go for it.
Yeah. So the people who have undergone such a change and swear to be happy with it, you don't believe them? What's your opinion on that?
I don't believe it at all. I think a lot of times what ends up happening is, if you follow those people, they often talk about the mental depression and the things that they're dealing with. And even the huge cultural examples of people that have done that have talked about the psychology that follows. Because I think what happens is they think that if they do this thing, they're going to be the opposite sex. And then, of course, they find out that, no, what you did is just a cosmetic procedure. This doesn't make you a woman. A man cannot become a woman because of surgery, and a woman cannot become a man because of surgery. And so, no, I very much believe that the people that are pretending that they're happy on that journey, it's because you have people that are giving them money and giving them sponsorships. And to some degree, wealth affords people a level of temporary happiness. But deep down, I say you can lie to the entire world, but you can't lie to yourself.
Do you know any of these people?
I've had multiple people on my show that have, quote unquote, transitioned.
Nobody in your family or friends?
No, there's no trans people in my family. No.
Haar meest actuele en spraakmakende uitzendingen betrof die over Brigitte Macron, de vrouw van de Franse president Emmanuel Macron, die volgens Owens ter wereld kwam als Jean-Michel.
The claim is that Brigitte Macron lived as a man named Jean-Michel, or John Michael, for 30 years before becoming Brigitte. Number 2, Brigitte Macron claims that Jean-Michel is her brother. Problem is that her brother's missing.
You did an expose about Macron's wife. Why was that so important to you?
It wasn't important to me. It was just, I, for a living, just tell the truth. It's not really that complicated. I'm surprised by how viral this went, and I was actually surprised by how bizarre it is that the media is lying. And by lying, I mean sharing fake pictures, debunked photos. It is not Brigitte Macron in this photo. It's Brigitte's daughter in the photo, Tefan. Or they show the photo of the wedding, and it's actually a photo of a different faculty member that Brigitte went to school with, their first wedding. The original photos have been found. There's no debate there. And I had no idea that the French people were protesting in the streets and that this had been going on for years. I literally had no idea. I just was reading an article in the Daily Mail, and they were talking about how Emmanuel Macron was speaking out on this issue. It was going on for years. It's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And that, what was weird about me in the article is that they didn't debunk the fact that Brigitte lived as a man for 30 years. They just shamed everybody, just name calling. And that's very weird to me. It's such an easy thing to debunk. You don't have to call people any names. You just say, here's a picture of me when I was a kid. Here's a picture of me married. Here's a picture of me pregnant. I mean, I would be laughing at it.
But you were convinced.
I then went and found what is the source of this, because that's where my mind goes. And I realized that the media was good on making this story not go global, but that journalists, in conjunction with genealogists, worked for 3 years on a report. It wasn't just like a blog on Reddit or something like that. Nothing in their report got debunked. Like I said, the easiest thing you could ever debunk is that you didn't live for the first 30 years of your life. Here's me on my cheerleading team. Here's me in high school. Here's me in university. They can't produce any photos for the first 30 years of Brigitte's life. And rather than gaslighting the public, it's very easy. They're saying, Brigitte says, oh, that's my brother, Jean-Michel. Just go for a walk with your brother. Where is he? The genealogist determined that for the first 30 years, Jean-Michel existed, just based on, the data, everything you do, you create paperwork. There was a digital footprint of Jean-Michel for 30 years. And then Jean-Michel just stops, and Brigitte Macron, now Macron, is born. And they look identical. It obviously looks like this is the person when you're following the story. It's very thorough. It was like a 6-part series. This is not something that should even be... The conspiracy is not being able to debunk something this easy. And the other thing that registered me as strange was that rather than debunking it, Brigitte sent... and I shouldn't say Brigitte. I should actually say one of Brigitte's friends. As soon as they learned the journalists were working on the story, the journalists were just asking basic questions like fact-checking, things that the media had said about the family. They sent the police to take the journalists' phones. They detained them for hours to figure out who was working on the story. That's not a normal thing to do. Because if someone was working on a story right now of me, and they said for the first 30 years she lived as a man, I would be like, you're an idiot. And again, I was just shocked that the story was so big in France and that it hadn't even made its way across the pond. And so I just kind of covered it quite, this is crazy. This is going on right now. And then the media went absolutely wild and tried to stop people. And so I say to people, don't listen to me. Go read it yourself. Listen to what these reporters have done for 3 years. I think it's a 6-part series, 7-part series. Read it, and make your own conclusions. And I think the reason why it keeps getting bigger is that when people do read it, they're like, wait a second, there's something here,
But do you think the majority of people care?
I would definitely think that if you're a voting citizen in a country and believe that you're being lied to in such a huge capacity, you would care.
Yeah, but what if she said, yeah, it's true?
That would, by the way, if they went into this and said this is all true, totally different story. But it's the gaslighting of the public calling people names. It's not okay. It's just not okay. If you say, it's my business, I don't want to talk to you about it, blah, 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 all of that is fine. It is the insistence that the public, the French public, are all deluded liars that's really wrong. The press has to stop gaslighting the public. We talk about freedom of the press, but we don't often talk enough about freedom from the press, right? We're concerned about protecting the press's freedoms, but we don't realize that what the press now engages in a lot is removing the freedoms from the public by constantly calling people names instead of just providing basic answers, or simply saying it's not your business. But don't lie, don't gaslight.
Last topic, your president. Who will it be next November?
Well,
what's going to change it?
I would hope it's going to be Donald Trump. I obviously think the world recognizes that Joseph Biden is not cognitively there. He's on a cognitive decline. I think he has early onset dementia. Actually, I think it's quite progressed now because it's impacting the way he walks.
Could you picture two scenarios? What if Biden wins and what if Trump wins? How does the world look like in 1 year from now?
I'm terrified of a Biden win. I genuinely believe that will be the end of America with the invasion that's happening at our border. I just don't see a way for America to survive another 4 years. And of course, every time the Democrats get into power, it's just wars. We're suddenly involved in wars. There was no wars, no conflict when Trump was in office. And I think that's why they wanted him gone. I think the military-industrial complex, as we term it in America, is very real. And they want nonstop global wars and the ability to, transform banking and imperialize here and there. And that wealth is taken and given to a very small group of elitists and never back to the people. And we are the ones that are funding it. And Trump kind of put a stop to that. So I get why they don't want him in power. But obviously, they will be back in power or I guess retain their power if Biden is elected again. Under Trump, no person is perfect, but we do know that he has no interest in war. We do know that he is what I would term to be a nationalist and very much believes in America first. And so of the candidates, and also he can form a sentence. He can remember what he ate for breakfast, right? Huge win. I guess we've lowered the bar so much that we're just proud that Trump can remember what he ate for breakfast. But yes, he's the exact opposite. He's got all of his cognitive abilities with him. And despite the fact that both of them are older candidates, Trump, I think the reason why he still has so much energy is largely because he's never drank alcohol his entire life and because his brother died of alcoholism. And I think that has served his cognitive abilities very well.
Yeah. But in both cases, a lot of people won't be happy.
And so is politics, Yeah. Always.
But with the tension right now, what's going to cause that? Are you looking at a civil war in America? Whatever happens?
I don't think so. I think, I don't think there'll ever be a civil war. I think if anything happened, there would be a civil divorce, which is much nicer. Nobody has to die. We just disagree. Let's just go our separate ways. Yeah.
Waardeer jij wat we doen? Schrijf je dan snel in voor onze nieuwsbrief. Vind je het belangrijk wat we doen? Besef dan goed dat wat wij doen eigenlijk helemaal niet kan. Het is een wonder. Voor 2020 was het onmogelijk geweest om zonder staatssteun, zonder subsidies of sponsoren en tegenwerking van Big Tech een mediakanaal te runnen dat tegen de stroom in op zoek gaat naar waarheidsvinding. Dat wonder, dat zijn wij samen. De grote groep bezorgde burgers die dagelijks doneren en daar zijn we ontzettend dankbaar voor. Maar we mogen niet achteroverleunen. Er wordt dan weliswaar niet meer over corona gesproken, maar de informatieoorlog was nog nooit zo hevig. En erger nog, de ideologische agenda wint terrein en is meedogenloos. We staan in het oog van de orkaan. En een platform als Blackbox heeft maar één taak: doorgaan en groeien. Groeien om nog meer mensen bewust te maken van wat er werkelijk gaande is. Daarom vraag ik jou en eigenlijk iedereen die droomt van een toekomst in vrijheid, waar stemmen weer gehoord mogen worden, om ons te steunen. Want het is keihard nodig. juist nu.